Fear doesn't need to be fixed. It just needs to be heard. Every time you meet fear with logic, you miss the chance to build safety. Every time you downplay hesitation with your words, you add more pressure. Every time you try to win the objection, you lose the person. So instead, normalize hesitation. Name the fear without judgment. Ask questions that pull out the concern rather than try and push through it. So as you move into your next sales call, ask yourself, am I solving fear with facts? Or am I helping find the emotional clarity that this person needs to move forward? Welcome to the Close More Sales podcast. If you have ever lost a deal and couldn't figure out why, this is the episode that fixes that. Today, we're diving into one of the most misunderstood concepts in sales, why persuasion has very little to do with charisma and everything to do with clarity, emotional safety, and the ability to identify the real source of resistance in a conversation. If you've ever walked away from a sales call thinking, they said they liked me, they said it made sense, so why didn't they move forward? This episode is going to answer that question once and for all. I'm going to break down something that most sales trainers and programs either don't see or don't know how to teach. Because when you learn to identify the type of resistance in front of you, it's like flipping on the lights in a room you've always fumbled around in the dark. But first, why listen to this show? The purpose of this show is to empower sales professionals and entrepreneurs to push themselves to grow, achieve unimaginable success without burning out, and ultimately transform their lives. I'm Ian Ross, and I am obsessed with all things sales, and I work with teams across the world to make more money by asking better questions. The most proven path to achieving financial freedom is maximizing your earning potential, and a sales role is the lowest barrier with the highest possible ceiling for entry onto that path. Anyone can become a killer salesperson with the right techniques, mindset, and consistency. Everything we cover on this podcast is geared towards one thing, helping you close more sales so you can live the life you want. If you'd like to get a sheet breaking down all the things we say on a follow-up call so you never have to say, I'm just following up or I'm just checking in ever again, text follow up, that's 2 words, to 33777, and we'll send you a template of what to say on the phone completely for free. So let's get into it and talk about the elephant in the room. Sometimes the number just doesn't work. Of whatever it is you're selling, the price doesn't work. And that's not a persuasion problem, that's a math problem. And if it's a math problem, fundamentally, it's a marketing problem because you're talking to the wrong people. So the wrong people are put in front of you. But most sales aren't lost because the number is too low. They're lost because the prospect didn't feel certain enough to move forward. And that's not about math, that's about resistance. Every time someone says, I need to talk to my partner, let me just think about it. Can you follow up with me next week? They're not just stalling, they're resisting. And resistance doesn't show up randomly. If the prospect is a good fit, and especially if what you offer solves their situation, resistance comes from one of 2 places. Either they don't believe you, or they do believe you, but they don't believe in themselves. Let's talk about both here. The first one, credibility resistance. This one's obvious. They push back on terms. They poke holes in your claims. They start asking, how do I know if this works? Do you have any references? What if I want a refund? Start asking these types of questions. Now that number seems crazy high. They're questioning your legitimacy. And this is where most sales training lives. Anchor the value, show the timeline, reframe the risk for them, give proof, testimonials, case studies. Those tools are all great when you're solving a credibility issue. Let me give you a quick example here. I had a coaching client, it was last month actually. He was selling a high ticket program. He got off his call and said, man, that woman, she seems so skeptical of everything I said. And I asked him to send me the call. Sure enough, it wasn't any type of fear for that person. It was pure credibility. She did not believe that he could help her because she had been burned before. And so therefore she had a struggle believing what he was saying. and needed more answers about his certifications. She wanted to know about refund policies. She kept going back to like, how do I know this isn't just some other gimmick or some other thing that won't work for me? And he kept trying to connect emotionally for her, but she didn't really need empathy in that moment. She needed proof to then connect the dots with empathy. So that's a type of resistance that kills plenty of deals, but way more than any refund policy or anything like that is another type of resistance, and that's fear-based resistance. This one's subtle. They're not arguing with you. They're not overly skeptical. Oftentimes they're saying, this makes sense. I like this, but they don't buy. They delay, they ghost, they disappear. And here's where it gets tricky. They often look and sound like it's going to be a yes. They're friendly, they like you, maybe they even laugh at your jokes. They're tracking for everything you think makes sense. So you assume the close is right around the corner, you repeat your value, you reassert your offer, maybe even sweeten the deal with a little bit extra. Here's what's really going on. They already believe that you can help them. They don't believe yet in their own ability to make a good decision. That's fear. And fear, when it's real, doesn't sound like, I'm afraid. It sounds like, I just want to be sure I'm doing the right thing. Let me take the weekend to think. Yeah, this all makes sense. I just want to make sure I've considered everything. Fear hides behind logic. It shows up dressed in reason and responsible decision making. I had a student, he sold leadership coaching, and he was talking to like mid-level managers, mostly in tech. He's a great guy. He's very charismatic. He got a lot of calls where people said, this is awesome, but let me talk to my partner. What he didn't realize is that half those people were not talking to anyone. There was no partner. This was just a socially acceptable way to delay action, because what they were really feeling was, if I sign up for this and I don't follow through, will I feel like I wasted money? Will I feel like I'm not a smart person? That's not about your offer. That's about their identity. When someone delays for identity-based fear and you respond with logic, you're shouting into a locked room. More value won't help. More urgency won't help. What they need is safety. So what do you do with fear-based resistance? You don't overpower it. You don't logic your way through it. You create a container for it. Here's a line I use all the time. I say, other people I've spoken to at this point, they usually still have one or two hesitations they haven't said out loud yet. I don't know if that's true for you. What's so powerful about that line? I am charging at the resistance. So many salespeople fear the objection. They fear the hesitation. They don't want to approach the obstacle. For me, I charge at the objection. I run barreling towards whatever their hesitation is, whatever their concern is, so that its power is diminished. Anything you don't call out grows in the mind of your prospect. Or, at best, you cross your fingers and hope they're not actually thinking it, which is not a great way to be a salesperson. We want all the chips on the table. We want no fog of war hiding any hesitations, any other decision makers, any other concerns. We want it all on the table. Conversation and persuasion in general is a game of imperfect information. We can't really see into their brain, right? We don't know what they're thinking exactly. We don't know who else has any say. We can't see their bank account. There's all these factors where there is imperfect information. Our job is to turn the lights on in the room, is to shine a spotlight on every shadow, to see what is actually going on. So I will repeat that line. A lot of people I've spoken to at this point, they still have one or two hesitations that they're almost even afraid to say out loud. I don't know if that's true for you. What am I doing here? I'm not calling them out. I'm not pushing them to even confess something. By the nature of that ending line, it's not, is that true for you, Mr. Prospect? It's, I don't know if that's true for you. It's a negative statement trail off instead of an actual, let me take it out of you question. That is such a powerful tactic. For those of you who are having sales conversations all the time, if you were to say that, again, in your own words, and then look side by side versus the way I just said that, you would probably notice some pretty profound differences if you were honest with yourself. The other people I've talked to in similar situations, they still have one or two hesitations. They're almost afraid to say out loud. I don't know if that's true for you. I don't know if that's true for you. I'm not calling them out. I'm not pushing them. They don't have to confess anything. I am creating space for them to offer up what's on their mind. I am inviting safety.
My name is Lance McCann. I have recently switched sessions with Ian Ross. Those conversations with Ian has made me $50,000 in the past 2 deals that I've had. I was able to renegotiate, go back and renegotiate the original purchase price on one deal, and I saved $40,000. I got another $10,000 off my other deals. Call Ian, give him a chance. You won't regret it.
If you like what you just heard and would like similar types of success, text CLOSE to 33777. And we'll see if you qualify to join objection-proof selling. We're taking good sales reps and we're making them objection-proof.
Think about the psychology behind that phrasing. Other people I've spoken to, I'm normalizing the hesitation that they already have. They usually still have one or two. I'm setting an expectation that hesitation is common. It's not unusual. I don't know if that's true for you. It preserves their autonomy and removes pressure. This is elegant, it's disarming, and most importantly, it is effective. Here's a real example from one of our trainings. A rep was speaking with a woman who, I think she was joining a financial coaching program in some way. It wasn't a leadership one, but she was smiling. She was nodding, saying it all made sense. She wasn't moving forward though. She just wasn't moving forward. And the rep said, other people I've spoken to, they usually still have one or two things they're thinking through at this point. I don't know if that's true for you. And she paused and she looked down and then she said, honestly, I've just never trusted myself to stick with things. That's what's actually going on right now. Boom. That is the real objection. And now you can help. How many of you would be afraid to ask something like that and just trust that she's got to talk to her husband? Now you're no longer dealing with the surface level logic. You're in the place where change happens. And that is where the magic is. When people feel emotionally safe, they give you the real data points. That's what makes you dangerous in a good way as a sales professional, because now you're not guessing. You're not trying to bulldoze them with these logic traps and features and benefits. You're guiding, okay? So let's wrap this up here with a simple mental model that you can use on every call. The real thing is to figure out which level of resistance are they in. And then once you've done that, you want to ask yourself, is this person doubting me truly, or are they doubting themselves? If it's about you or your company, solve it with clarity, proof, credibility, all that jazz. If it's about them, you solve it with permission, empathy, and space. Here is what that looks like practically. If they're asking hard, skeptical questions, it's probably credibility. There's variations among the avatar of who you're talking to and what their resistance look like, but that's more or less how to think about it. If they're sounding positive, but just sort of hesitant to offer up a type of commitment, if they seem sort of wishy-washy, if it doesn't even really make sense in your brain, what's holding them back, that's often a type of self-inward fear. They're afraid of messing up. And most sales reps assume that logic will fix fear. They think logic will fix fear. So they stack more value, more savings, more benefits, more bullet points of how great this will be. Then they ask the question, don't you want to do this? But that doesn't land because you're solving the wrong problem. Before we close here, I want to walk through something critical that doesn't get enough airtime in sales training. And that's what not to do when fear shows up. We talked a little bit about it here so far, but most salespeople, when they hear fear, they default to what feels like reassurance, but actually creates this weird internal disconnect. So you will often see this among even pretty experienced salespeople because they don't know better, that they are always relating their own personal anecdotes as to how they overcame something and they realized this and, oh, you want to do this and that makes sense because I wanted to do that. The prospect does not need to hear your personal story, okay? They really don't. In fact, every time you were talking about yourself, you can view it as draining the meter of the prospect feeling certain that this is right for them. It is true that stories are one of the most impactful ways to get people to realize through the explanation in a story concept, in a story framing, that, oh, I can see how that would relate to me. Because if you just tell them directly, they can choose not to believe you, and most of them won't. Or at least they'll have a hesitation, like, you could be lying to me, you're incentivized to be dishonest, you're incentivized to get me to take action. I don't know if I believe you. The framework of a story allows people to not think, I don't believe you, and then potentially go, yeah, I can see how that would relate to me. The difference is you want to tell a third-party story, other people you've helped, other clients, other prospects. You don't want to make it about yourself, because it's the same principle of, oh, I can imagine how it relates to me if I'm the prospect via a story. But if it's through the lens of the personal experience of the salesperson, it's the same idea as, let me tell you what you need to do. It loses the ability, at least as effectively, you can get some of it, but it loses the maximum ability of getting them to relate to their own example and their own life. So do not include yourself in the third-party story. So a few more things here. We can get into some more specific examples, because I want to give real value, not just talk hypothetically about this, about what prospects say when they're afraid, and then how not to respond. So if your prospect says, and these are broad examples because people listening are in different industries, they say, yeah, I just want to make sure I'm not rushing into anything. You don't want to say, well, there's nothing to worry about. Everything's laid out clearly here. What are you confused about? That response invalidates their caution and speeds up their fear. It's like telling someone standing at the edge of a cliff, hey, just jump. It's totally safe. What is better is, that's a fair concern. A lot of people I've worked with, they want to be sure they weren't rushing either. Would it be helpful if we actually slow down for a second and just talk through what feeling rushed actually means for you here, and if there's a way we can prevent it? You guys see how that's different? Another example, the prospect says, yeah, I'm the kind of person who needs to think about stuff before I say yes. Do not say, sure, but what do you need to think about? We already talked about this. That's subtle pressure disguised as logic, but you've basically just said you shouldn't need to think, which then puts them on the defensive. They are already on the defensive. You are amplifying the type of resistance they're giving you. Better is, that's a natural concern. Can I ask what part of this feels like you still need more time or space for it to actually land for you? You're not trying to change their nature. You're inviting them to talk through their internal hesitation, which lets you serve instead of sell, at least in the mind of how most people think about selling versus serving. I personally combine the two. Another example, the prospect says, this all sounds good. I just want to make sure I won't regret it. Don't say, there's no way you'll regret this. This has helped so many people. That sounds reassuring, but it is a dismissal. It moves the conversation away from their real fear instead of toward it. A better one is, that makes sense. Can I ask, when you say regret it, what specifically do you imagine could go wrong? Charge towards the specificity. Help them name their fear, which is the first step to actually dissolving it. You want to actually break down each individual thing, not the high concept, because when you break it down individually, they'll realize it's not true. If the prospect says, I'm just not sure this is the right time, don't say, if not now, then when? There's never a perfect time. Those are canned responses that provoke guilt. They put the pressure on rather than helping that prospect come to clarity. A better one is, that's a perfectly fair sensation you're going through. Can I ask you, what would need to be true for you to feel like it actually is the right time? Shift the conversation toward their criteria for decision-making instead of pushing them into a decision they don't yet feel ready to. These differences might seem small, but they are profound in the minds of your prospects. The prospect says, I just need to talk to my spouse first. Don't say, do you really think they'll say no? Aren't you actually the man in the house? Aren't you involved in every decision? Again, pressure. You're undermining their relationship and trying to assert control. It's the opposite way to fight the resistance. Instead, say, absolutely. What do you think they would need to understand? Because you know them better than I do, before they'd be on board with this with you. Go towards what they would need to understand. Be open, respectful, helpful. You're now collaborating instead of closing. The pattern here is simple for the things I just threw at you. Every time you meet fear with logic, you miss the chance to build safety. Every time you downplay hesitation with your words, you add more pressure. Every time you try to win the objection, you lose the person. So instead, normalize hesitation. Name the fear without judgment. Ask questions that pull out the concern rather than try and push through it. Because here is the truth. Fear doesn't need to be fixed. It just needs to be heard. And once it's heard, it tends to shrink. So as you move into your next sales call, ask yourself, am I solving fear with facts? Or am I helping find the emotional clarity that this person needs to move forward? Let me say something that might sting. It might sting a little bit. If you're charismatic, you are more likely to miss fear-based resistance. Why? Because people like you. They don't want to disappoint you. So they smile and nod and say, yeah, this makes sense. This is great. I love it. Thank you so much for helping me. But inside, they're still unsure. And if you're not trained to listen for what's not being said as well as what is, you'll walk away with salesperson happy ears thinking that this person is a yes, when they're actually maybe just raised with good manners. That is why charisma is a trap. It creates inconsistent closers. It makes the outcome dependent on your energy that day instead of the clarity you provided. Real persuasion is scalable. It's not your personality. It doesn't require being in a good mood. It doesn't rely on momentum or rhythm or charm. It relies on diagnosis. It relies on understanding. It relies on emotional intelligence. When you learn to see resistance for what it is, you stop pushing and you start guiding. You stop treating every stall as a price objection. You stop thinking follow-up means explain again. You create safety. You create space. You create certainty. That's persuasion without charisma. Because when you understand resistance, truly understand where it's coming from and why, you don't need to force anything. You just remove the friction that was already there. We don't make people have to buy from us. We don't push. We don't close. We don't even sell. We coach people on how to sell us on what is right for them. We help people effectively convince us of their certainty. That's how you close more sales. That's how you scale a team. That's how you win without burning out. I'm Ian Ross. This has been the Close More Sales Podcast.